Hi there. Before we get started, we're going to look just at a little background of graphing the sine function. If you look right here, the sine function y equals sine theta, you'll notice that there is no x. So now our x is going to be theta. Theta is your angle measure. And that would make then the x-axis right up here would be theta. And your y-axis is going to actually represent the amplitude or the radius of your circle that you're dealing with. And the y is familiar to us. The theta is going to replace the x now. When you're graphing the sine function, we're going to graph it at the actually five main points. We're going to graph when theta is equal to 0, which is this point on the unit circle, when theta is equal to pi over 2, when theta is equal to pi, when theta is equal to 3 pi over 2, and then when theta is equal to 2 pi, which brings us back to the beginning, which will have the same sign as sine of 0. When we're making our theta intervals on the x-axis, or now called the theta axis, we're going to be graphing one cycle today. So our furthest point down the line is going to be the period 2 pi. Halfway between 0 and 2 pi is pi. And then if you cut that in half, that gives you pi over 2. Now that tells us that each interval is pi over 2. So from here to here is pi over 2. Here to here, now we're at 2 pi over 2, which is pi. 2 pi over 2 plus pi over 2 is 3 pi over 2, which is right here. And then 4 pi over 2, which simplifies to 2 pi. Now to graph it, we are going to use the inputs of theta and find out what is the sine at those positions. And the sine is going to represent our output of our function, which is y. So looking at 0, our y coordinate is 0. So at a theta value of 0, our sine is 0. At theta value of pi over 2, our sine is 1. So our output is 1 at that position. At a theta value of pi, our sine is back to 0. And again, I'm just looking at the y coordinates. Those are the sine values. Where theta is 3 pi over 2, our sine is negative 1. And at 2 pi, back to the beginning, our sine is 0 at this position right here. Then we go to graph it. So we graph at 0, sine is also going to be 0. At pi over 2, sine is going to be 1. At pi, sine is going to be 0. At 3 pi over 2, sine is going to be negative 1. And at 2 pi, sine is going to be 0. And we're going to do our best to draw the curve. So the curve goes up. It's going to come back down through 0, through negative 1, and then back to 2 pi. So there's a breakdown as we start graphing sine. That's where we're getting those inputs. Our inputs are going to be theta, and then our outputs are going to be the y values of sine. So sine, remember, is your y's of all these coordinates as you go around the unit circle. So you're now ready to start looking at any of those practice problems.